Between the period 2001 and 2010, there were several major emergency management interagency responses that played a key role in improving how disasters are handled. As a result of these disasters, the lessons learned helped shape how emergency management would change their preparedness approach, determine mitigation strategies, respond, and assist in the recovery of disasters. The disasters that will be discussed are the terrorist attack on September 11, 2001, Hurricane Katrina, August 29, 2005, Hurricane Rita on September 24, 2005, Hurricane Wilma on October 24, 2005, and the Deepwater Horizon oil rig disaster on September 13, 2010. It is the intent of this report to look at the disasters that occurred between 2001 and 2010 and show how the lessons learned changed the way in which disasters were handled and how it affected the interagency support which responded. The report will discuss changes that occurred to the preparation, mitigation, response, and recovery phases of each disaster because of the lessons learned from each disaster. The report will conclude with a summary of the impacts the lessons learned had on the interagency cooperation as it related to preparation, mitigation, response, and recovery. It will also provide comments by the writer as to positive and negative impacts the changes made on interagency cooperation. Lessons learned. In the aftermath of a disaster, there are normally lessons learned that can be gathered and incorporated into the planning efforts and preparation for the next event. During the period 2001 to 2020, there were many lessons learned that had a direct impact on the Emergency Management Society. Many of these lessons learned during this period came from the terrorist attack on September 11, 2001, as well as several hurricanes which impacted the United States in 2005, and finally the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. The National Commission of Terrorist Attacks upon the United States provided a good list of lessons learned that have been incorporated into emergency plans across the country. One of the biggest flaws that was found was a lack of communication between the different agencies. It found that there needed to be changes made in the emergency response procedures. During the summer of 2005, there were many lessons learned from the massive hurricanes that hit the continental United States. The major issues that always occurred are traffic problems, with residents electing to follow directives to leave the area. With the three major hurricanes, there was a failure with the evacuation information that was provided. This led to more confusion with the traffic in the storm areas. Another big lesson learned had to do with the shelters and the failures with providing adequate shelters for the number of people who decided to stay or could not evacuate. With the major hurricanes, there were lessons learned when it came to having to relocate medical patients and having plans in place to handle the volume of patients. While responding to an oil spill is different than the common natural disaster, these types of disasters not only can cause injury and death to individuals, it has a long and everlasting effect on the environment. When dealing with oil spills or hazardous material spills, there is a different set of rules which need to be followed. When volunteers arrive to assist, they must have a required set of training courses to ensure their safety. It also requires a lot of different paperwork and documentation. During the time of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, there were several forms that needed to be completed manually. This resulted in delays and became a lesson learned issue. Other lessons learned issues related to this disaster related to the health hazards that are involved and the required medical monitoring. Disaster interagency impacts on preparation. And looking at the impact the terrorist attack on 9/11 had on the preparation phase of emergency management, there was one change that had been instrumental. The Federal Emergency Management Administration, known as FEMA, established the National Incident Management System, known as NIMS, to help coordinate efforts during a disaster. NIMS has had a major impact on both the preparation and response phases of emergency management process. Since the establishment of NIMS process, the entire process from preparation to recovery has benefited from this coordination process. With the disaster that occurred during Hurricane Katrina, there were positive changes made to the emergency management process. These changes were incorporated in the plans used for Hurricane Rita and Wilma. The rise in evacuations could be tied to the fact that there were 3 major hurricanes that occurred within the month of each other. When it came to the hurricane, the ability to respond quickly and in an orderly manner is essential. The only way to ensure this occurs is to have agreements with local stakeholders in place prior to the disaster. This is why the preparatory phase of emergency management is essential. In response to what had happened in the past when hurricanes had occurred, there was mass shipments of water, communication, equipment, and personnel available for Wilma. When it comes to being prepared to handle a chemical or biological spill, there are steps that need to be taken during the preparation phase of the operation. Within the preparation phase, one needs to remember that safety is the most important issue that is addressed. You need to react open-minded and be able to think outside the box. Technical information might be very deceiving and can change the ways people think or react to a given situation. Disaster interagency impacts on mitigation. In looking at these disasters and what has been learned, there are many changes that have been implemented to reduce the impact of these types of events in the future. Most of these changes have come from the 9/11 terrorist attack in both New York and Virginia. Besides the effect the disaster had on the emergency management process, it also had a large impact on the individuals themselves. After the 9/11 attack, there were major changes to the medical field and the ways incidents like this impacted individuals. The post-traumatic stress disorder, known as PTSD, did have an impact on individuals other than the military. Changes were made to the way the medical community looked at major disasters and the way they provided treatment to individuals who were involved. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, known as NIST, also learned from the 9/11 terrorist attack. This agency recommends changes to building codes as they related to prevention of fires and the procedures that could be followed in future disasters. Several mitigation challenges have been discovered because of the 2005 hurricanes. One of those was the impact the storms had on the electrical systems within the damaged area. While the electrical systems cannot be absolutely protected, there were steps that have been taken to reduce the damage. When it comes to environmental disasters, there has been legislation passed that will help expedite the response and recovery efforts, as well as provide better guidelines for the training requirements. These regulations have had an impact on all stakeholders to provide safety, guidance, and procedures. Disaster interagency impacts on response. When it comes to the response efforts by all the stakeholders, the 9/11 attacks showed that all levels of response were heroic during this very challenging time. The sheer size of this disaster and the number of casualties that were involved had a major impact on the response effort. While the stakeholders were not ready to respond to a disaster of this size, there were changes which could be implemented. The biggest challenges related to the response were the lack of good communication and a lack of procedural guidance. Like all phases of the emergency management process, the implementation of the NIMS process will help coordinate all efforts in future disaster events. When hurricanes do hit the communication network that is available, normality is lost. It is essential for the emergency management response teams to have some means of communication so disaster response efforts can be efficiently addressed. When it comes to responding to a disaster that can have an impact on the environment, all members of the response team need to be monitored. From the Deepwater Horizon oil spill disaster, trying to be able to track information became the challenge. Changes have been made to all digital forms to be complete. This will help to expedite response efforts and provide a better way to track individuals on site. Disaster interagency impacts on recovery. As found in the findings of the 9/11 Commission, the recovery phase was also impacted and changes need to be made for future disasters. The lack of upfront planning had a direct impact on the recovery process. Despite the fact that the local, state, and federal agencies, along with the volunteer groups and private individuals, efforts were very gallant, there was still immense confusion and strained relationships. With the implementation of the NIMS across the country, the coordination between all stakeholders has dramatically improved, and recovery efforts are much better organized. When it comes to a disaster recovery, the hurricanes had a large influence in the changes that were made to the Stafford Act. Some of the changes that were made to the act addressed the grants that were available to the victims of the disaster. There was a push to assure that families were reunited after the tragic events of a hurricane. With this, two registration systems were developed. One was for the families and another for the children. While looking at the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, this disaster shows what can occur when safety regulations are not followed. For a successful operation to occur, all parties need to take responsibility to fulfill their duties. In this disaster, the owner and contractors working for them failed to follow safety procedures, and this expanded the damaged area. Conclusion. In reviewing the major disasters that occurred between 2001 and 2010, there are many lessons learned that had an impact on interagency preparedness, response, mitigation, and recovery. While the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001 was the most eye-opener to many people, it just showed how vulnerable the United States was at that time. It did have a good understanding of natural disasters such as flooding, hurricanes, and tornadoes. They also had some understanding when it came to environmental issues. They did not plan for a disaster the caliber of the 9/11 attack. As you can see, there were lessons learned that have been implemented to the emergency management program that have enhanced the response efforts. The fact is that the incident command structure is now utilized across the country, and this has dramatically helped with the communications efforts to assure that all stakeholders are moving towards a common goal and interagency cooperation is maintained. This attack had an impact on the building codes and safety codes related to the construction of future buildings. This should help mitigate structural damage to buildings and the infrastructure in the future. The devastation caused by hurricanes will continue if there are storms which impact the United States. While there were a lot of lessons learned from Katrina, it was encouraging to see that some of the recommended changes were implemented quickly and were able to be in place when the other hurricanes were forecasted and impacted land. Trying to get the communities to understand the severity and danger of the storms is and always will be challenging. Having three major hurricanes hit land did have a short-term impact on the number willing to leave the area, but over time that fades, just like the impact 9/11 had on the country over 20 years ago. In all the federal, state, and local agencies, along with all their shareholders, they do have a much better handle on how to respond to a hurricane. They have all learned lessons and realized how easy it is to fail. Chemical and biological spills require totally different ways of responding. These types of incidents not only affect the community, they can also impact the responders as well as the environment itself. As we can see from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, all aspects of the emergency management process were total failures. Not only did the company fail to handle their responsibilities, they tried to hide the damages they were causing. As a result, there was far more cleanup needed, and the impact on the environment was long-lasting. When it comes to disasters, good after-action reports or lessons learned discussions with all the stakeholders will help improve not only the response and recovery efforts, they can lead to mitigating the situation before they occur. These types of discussions can also identify weak parts in the emergency management program and lead to changes that will enhance the training and preparatory phases of the community.